Welcome to yet another episode of Open World Chat, your favorite podcast. I'm John Odom, and I'm here with Mark Card, my co-host. Say hi to the
Hi
people,
there.
Mark.
Hi there.
So we're going to talk today about actually an idea that Mark was enthusiastic about and had gotten me very excited. When you think of 70s paranoia movies, right? What do you think about? You think about 3 Days of the Condor. You
Yep.
think of The Conversation,
Yep.
of Serpico. There's just a whole list of them, right? That's why we think of it. But the same kind of vibe, same sort of energy was going on in sci-fi at the time too. And in a way, the 70s were a little bit of a golden age for sci-fi. I mean, first I should mention that really the Star Wars series of the early 70s was Planet of the Apes. Planet of the Apes kind of owned a lot of sci-fi at the time with multiple movies, with a
Oh,
TV show.
definitely.
But putting aside Planet of the Apes, what you see is a lot of 70s style paranoia in science fiction. What do you think, Mark? Did I say that right?
Definitely. It's the golden age of paranoid science fiction. The idea that you can't trust anything, no institutions work, we're all on our own. And the crazy thing is that all of them start with the premise that we're going to wipe each other out in an apocalypse.
That's true. It's pretty depressing. Well, it's very Cold War, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, just like the other paranoia movies of the 70s were Cold War, but it has a pretty different flavor to it with but in all these cases, yeah, it's the institutions, especially the government,
Yes.
that you can't trust because we're in the Watergate era.
Well, and it's not just Watergate, it's also Vietnam.
Oh, right, of course.
Because you've got the greatest generation and their crusade against fascism and even allying with the Soviets. We were on the right side of history. And now you've got Vietnam, where you've got one of the world's, biggest economies fighting against one of the world's smallest economies. And, is this the right decision to make? It's interesting. There's virtually no mass protest against Vietnam until they took the deferments away from college age kids.
Right.
And once they take deferments away from college age kids, the middle class realize they're going to have to sacrifice their kids for South Vietnam. And then you start getting protests in the streets, and you get military guys leaving their medals on the Capitol steps, and you get moms and dads and corporate figures and even Walter Cronkite coming out and saying this is a terrible idea. So it's not just Watergate in terms of distrust toward the government, it's also Vietnam.
What do you think, sir? What's your favorite example of one of these movies?
For example, is Colossus, the Forbin Project.
This is the Forbin Project. I haven't seen that. I started trying to watch it the other day and I didn't get to finish it. It was sucking me in. It was so cool. There's all kinds of stuff to say about it. What do you got? What do you got for us here?
Well, let's talk a little bit about the premise. The premise is that a scientist has developed a supercomputer the size of the Astrodome, which at the time was the largest indoor arena in the world. And it's in a mountain in Colorado. And it's touted as the ultimate defense system. Remember, we're in the middle of the Cold War in the 70s and the missile gap, which started in the 60s, and they're worried about Soviet domination. And the first thing when they turn this system on is, oh, hey, I'm not the only system like this. There's another one in the Soviet Union called Guardian.
Mm-hmm.
And then they ask to talk to each other. And when they talk to each other, they use math.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden they understand that now there's a new branch of math that the two computer systems have invented, which is far beyond human comprehension. Now, keep in mind, these computer systems are surrounded by moats and radiated fields, and there you can't unplug them. And the whole point of it was you have to have this fail-safe system to protect America or the motherland Russia against interference from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then they link each other. And they start saying, start telling the governments around the world, this is what you have to do. If you don't do these things, we're going to start launching nuclear missiles because now we're in control of all the nuclear missiles. And slowly it becomes clear that because the government didn't think through this AI project, they're now going to, like HAL, fulfill their original programming instructions, which is to prevent war from ever happening again. And to do that, they have to completely dominate human culture and take the role as guardian of the vanguard of the people. And now humanity has to submit to computer role, to computer domination, or they will be wiped out by the computers themselves.
It strikes me as such a more sophisticated look at AI run amok than either, say, HAL right before it or many years later Skynet. And
Right.
clearly, Skynet, clearly it's an ancestor to Skynet, but there was just so much more going on with this movie. I've got to finish it.
Well, the great part about this movie is that the fundamental premise is that the two systems go awry in terms of taking absolute control from humanity. Why? Because it adopted humanity's prerogatives.
Mhm.
And so, what it goes to show you is that you can't trust government to even run the most basic function of sovereignty, which is defense.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, basically, by trying to seek protection from our enemies, we have to give up total independence and freedom, which you know how Americans love their independence and freedom, uh, to machines.
Or at least they think they do most of the time. Um,
And so,
what's fascinating about this movie too is that I think you've got a couple of flavors of sci-fi paranoia coming out of the early 70s. There's the paranoia about government institutions, police institutions, just like you see in the non-sci-fi movies. There's also paranoia about technology.
yes,
And
absolutely.
and I think probably we want to get to that one for sure, but let's talk about the government here. Let's talk about other some more of these movies that really don't trust the institutions that are supposedly taking care of us from above and around. What you were mentioning? Oh, what was the movie you wanted to talk about?
Well, there's a couple I wanted to talk about: Logan's Run and
Logan's
Rollerball.
Run. That's what I was thinking. You want to talk about Logan's Run? Yeah.
Well, Logan's Run. So the way I was looking at the progression of these movies is you got Colossus, which happens in 70. It's a very early 70s movie. And you know, as we mentioned, the distrust of government starts in the late 60s with the counterculture.
Sure.
Now, Logan's Run is an interesting movie because premise of the movie is that there's a nuclear holocaust and that the only societies left is under this domed city. And one of the most important things here is that you have a little crystal in your hand, and the little crystal is a time clock. And at certain ages, it changes colors. And there's a book for this movie. And in the book, you only live to be 21.
Oh, it's just 21.
Yes.
Because isn't
It's
it
only
like 30 in the movie?
Yes, in the movie it's 30, but
Yeah.
I suspect that's because they wanted certain actors to be in the movie and they weren't in their 20s.
Mm.
And so your entire life is dominated by this crystal in your hand, and you're only allowed to live to be a certain age. Now, of course, they don't tell you that you're going to be destroyed when you hit that age. You go through this pseudo religious ceremony where you ascend to another plane, another existence, but of course, you're murdered.
Of course.
Now, what happens in the society is that you live this incredibly hedonistic society, drugs, free love, and there are people who refuse to accept this, and they come in two flavors. They come in the drug addicted people who kind of live on the fringes of the dome, and they're a wild, barbaric kind of existence, and they cause trouble to the authority of the state. Or there are the people who fundamentally reject it and leave and run away to sanctuary. And what you find out, spoiler alert, this is a movie that's 50 years old almost, is that none of it works. None of it's true. You can't trust the government. You can't trust society. You can't trust the technology which runs this society. You can't trust the military. There's a whole military organization called the Sandmen, which are designed to track down the people who try to run away from their last day. And you can't trust mainstream culture because they're lying to you about surviving. They're lying to you about ascending to another plane when you die. But then you can't trust the counterculture either, because at the end of the movie, you find out, okay, there's kind of a state of nature outside the dome, but there's no sanctuary. There's no place where you're going to be safe. There's no place where you can't live whatever life you want. And in
Yeah,
the end,
but isn't it in positive? It sort of turns Genesis on its head, where
yes, it is
they,
because
they great.
now
Yeah.
you're no longer dominated by these institutions, whether it's government, military, society, and you now have free will. That's one of the most important things, I think, in paranoid science fiction, or even the paranoid cinema of the 70s, is this resistance to conformity, the resistance to having 2.5 kids and going to college. And because all of that is a trap against your creativity and your fundamental kind of tendency toward independence and liberty and freedom of action. So these movies are very much in touch with the counterculture that you have, which basically takes place because the kids born during the baby booming revolution after World War II, they have a level of wealth and independence and freedom that other generations never had.
I still, just an aside, I gotta say, when I think of Logan's Run, I think of Box
Oh, me
saying
too.
fish and plankton, protein from the sea. It's
Well,
funny
I think
what's waiting for you if you try to get away.
right. And that guy, the interesting thing is he was probably the one of the best pedigreed actors in that movie.
Oh, no kidding.
That was a stage actor who was extremely well known and had won many, many awards, and was kind of a coup for them to get him to play this minor but significant role.
Hmm.
Now, I have a personal connection to Logan's Run because part of it was filmed in my hometown.
Oh, no kidding.
So the scene at the end where they emerge, well, no, to get to escape, they have to dive into that pool of water. There's like this futuristic landscape, and they dive into a pool of water
Oh
to
yeah, huh?
get to where Box is.
Hmm.
That's a thing in Fort Worth called the Water Gardens,
Oh,
and they
okay.
filmed there.
That's cool.
And then the other cool thing about it is there's a building where there's a scene where they're in kind of the central government control building, and it's in kind of a modern building. That's the Dallas City Hall. And
Okay.
at the same
A
time they
Texas
filmed this, shortly
production.
after they filmed the bits of Logan's Run here, is there was a PBS movie of an Ursula K. Le Guin, a movie based on one of Ursula K. Le Guin's classic novels, The Lathe of Heaven,
Hmm.
and they filmed some scenes in the water garden there too.
The
So
Logan's Run was really deep in the heart of, huh?
yeah, it really is. But I love Logan's Run because let's see, I guess it came out in 76. So I was 14 years old.
Yeah.
And when you're 14 and a teenager in the 70s, and you're already driven toward independence and rebellion by testosterone, now you have this whole string of movies which embrace that kind of middle finger to society.
Yeah, and with, Colossus being an exception here, at least I think, again, having not seen it, I'm speaking out of my ass a little bit here, but unlike the more traditional paranoia movies of the 70s where you're dealing with the government then and there, the institutions then and there, what sets the sci-fi ones apart is that it's of course projected into sort of dystopian futures
Right.
with governments run amok. And I'm thinking of like oh, there's a bunch of them, but Soylent Green, I finally got around to watching Soylent Green recently, which Pretty good movie. It's it's treated as though it's some sort of kitschy, campy thing, but it's not. It's a straight up well done film. Although
Yeah,
the end
and
was
and it
funny.
taps into the other kind of uh movement during the 70s that says all these things that you trust in aren't working is the environmental movement.
Yeah, I can see that. Sure.
It's kind of interesting. I used to teach at San Jose State University, and on the very first Earth Day, do you know what they did to kind of celebrate Earth Day? They
Uh-oh.
buried a car on campus. Down with the whole automobile culture, and automobiles pollute. Well, of course, later on, they had to declare part of the campus a toxic waste site because you buried a car without draining the gasoline, the oil, and the hydraulic fluid.
Brilliant. They created a little mini dump
Yeah, they
landfill from
they
it.
they, they
Great way to
created a toxic waste site to celebrate Earth Day.
Mhm.
But the point is, the Omega Man talks about how misuse of resources forces us into this terrible situation.
Right, right. That's another interesting boy, we're getting into the Charlton Heston movies, right?
Omega Man too, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What are some others? The dystopian future. Um,
One of the ones I
um,
like the most is Rollerball.
right. Rollerball's a good one. Haven't seen
And
it in
so
a while.
if you look at Colossus, it talks about how you can't trust government. And the fundamental premise under Rollerball is that after a nuclear holocaust, government can't be trusted. So who do we let run society? Corporations.
Hmm.
And each city has its own corporation, which is a fundamental part of the economy, but each city controls it. So you've got Houston controls energy. You've got New York, and I forget what they control. But each city represents a kind of economic guild, and government no longer exists. Society is run by businesses.
That movie was ahead of its time too. Because, as we've said, the institution you have to watch out for in most of these movies is the government, or maybe
That's
it's
right.
the police, the Sandman or whatever. And later on, you see, and it's not sci-fi, but I think there's a line of differentiation between pre-network, the movie network, and post-network. And I think after network, in which you have the multinationals rule the world, it was the message of that movie, or a big part of it. And after that, I think you start seeing that reflected in a lot of movies. Who's the villain in Alien, right? It's not the
Yeah.
government, it's the corporation. And from that point on, you start seeing these institutions you can't trust are much more often corporate. And I think that's continued to this day. But Rollerball was ahead of that curve.
Way ahead of that curve.
Mhm.
And of course, what's the theme here? The theme here is that whether it's corporations, whether it's government, whether it's a super hedonistic society, these institutions can't be trusted. They're all fundamentally corrupt.
Mhm.
They're all fundamental threats to your liberty, your independence, and your humanity.
They're all social anarchist movies, right?
Yeah, kind of. But the interesting thing is with what I talk about with Logan's Run is, well, basically you can go live in the state of nature again. So
Yeah.
essentially, Logan's Run is it's not purposeful, but it's a rehash of the debate between Rousseau and Voltaire. What's the fundamental, and to some extent, Thomas Hobbes, what's the fundamental nature of humanity? Rousseau would say, well, we're best when we're in the state of nature. We're freed from the control of society and government. Then we're going to do what's naturally best for everyone. And people like Hobbes and Voltaire would say, are you kidding me?
Right.
State of nature is nasty, brutish, and short. Life in the state of nature is nasty, brutish, and short.
That's a
So
classic
there's
line.
there's a dynamic in these movies about uh, what's better for humankind to live in a society that's fundamentally ordered but reduces individual expression and creativity and liberty, or one which is chaotic and might lead to nuclear holocausts.
Mhm. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about this paranoia. about the machines too. Go back to that aspect of the Foreman project, which again was a perfect, I think, film to start the conversation because it goes in both directions.
Yeah.
Because the paranoia against the AI, which really started, it didn't start with 2001, but that's what sort of threw into people's collective consciousness in 1969. And then you see it really take off, and you start seeing it in all over the place in sci-fi, in TV
Yeah.
and in movies. You got things like Westworld, you know,
Right.
you got the Yul Brynner robot run amok in TV. I mean, you've got I think of the Bionic movies here. You got the Fembots, right?
Yes.
And even the biggest mysterious cryptid of all, Bigfoot, turns out to be a robot, right?
Yeah.
So we're suddenly really worried about robots. We're really worried about machines, sort
No,
of.
that even shows up in the comic books. You get Ultron in the 70s.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. It was there.
Well, I
It's
think this
not.
goes back even further. I think this goes back to the silent film Metropolis is basically we live in this ultra ordered society run by machines,
Mhm.
and people don't even that this extends out way beyond that. It's the Matrix.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Not only do these institutions exist, you don't even know they're there.
Right, right. You know,
And you're
one of my
happy not knowing it's there until somebody offers you the choice red pill or blue pill.
right, right. One of my favorites from the 70s, because there's so much else going on which we could spiral off on, but that's for another episode, is the Stepford Wives.
Oh man, that is such a good movie.
That is such an interesting movie. And it's I mean, there's so much to unpack there. Obviously, it was a feminist movie with feminist themes, but when you break down who these Stepford wives are, they're not clones, they're not aliens, they're robots, right?
Yeah, no, and again, it's not government run.
Right. That's not government run. That is pure
That's
para.
pure private sector.
Hmm. And in that
Eh,
case, it's about being replaced by machines in this, backwards way to bring back, the worst of patriarchy, but it's still about being replaced by machines. So I think it still firmly fits into that category.
yeah, definitely does, and way ahead of its time. I mean,
Yes.
look what's going on in society right now.
Right. Well, look at the remake they did of it.
Yeah,
They completely watered it down to blather.
yeah, it's interesting because it shows up again. You know, it showed up in that movie with Florence Pugh in it, and Olivia Wilde and Harry Styles.
Now,
It's
which
a that Don't Worry, Darling.
don't worry, darling. That
Yeah,
rings a
it's a
bell. I
movie
don't know.
about a couple that moves into this perfect community. And then later they find out that all these perfect wives are not human.
Mhm. Another one of those. That theme never gets old, though.
Yeah, and this just goes back to the fact that we all have some horrible experience with whether it's bureaucratic government or social pressure against being who you really want to be,
Mhm.
or we all have to live in this ordered society where we don't have any control over part of that order.
Right, right.
But I think a lot of these movies are just a reflection of the human condition. Holy crap. I didn't, and now you even have philosophers saying, well, because everybody is a DNA-based life form, there is no free will because we're all slaves to evolution. And my kind of half serious, half joking response to that is, yes, I choose not to read that book.
I get it.
But
I see what you did there.
but see, that's the fundamental human impulse against this kind of structure is, no, damn it, I'm not this guy that is completely controlled by government or DNA or society or the pressure to be married or whatever it is, the pressure to conform.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because here's the thing. You see these kinds of movies in no matter what the political, socioeconomic structure, cultural construct you have in that movie. I mean, you have in whatever society you live in. You see these kinds of works in societies where, you live in a totalitarian government. You have these in relatively free countries.
Hmm.
And it's just the fact that people don't want to be hemmed in. People don't want to be. There's several elements here. One is, I think, all of these movies assume a dichotomy, the old dichotomy of man. We have these impulses to order and we have these impulses to chaos. And depending on what the need for survival is, you you might have to embrace chaos or you might have to embrace order. And so it assumes that there's this both fundamental destructive and fundamental creative side to man. And it all stems from our basic same nature. A lot of these science fiction movies start out with the assumption that we can't control each other and we can't control ourselves. So we end up in nuclear apocalypse and have to start over again.
Man, you're getting me down.
Well, the other side of that is that after the apocalypse, we
We figured it
band
out.
we band together and we
Right.
find some kind of way to organize and deal with the situation that ultimately came from our own destructive impulse.
Right. These movies, they're not nihilism.
No, they aren't.
They are
And,
not.
fundamentally, most of these movies are optimistic.
Yeah. At the end, when all is said and done, they really are.
Yeah,
Logan's Run is a great example.
you know, um, and I think you can run these back to, you can extend these out to a movie like La Femme Nikita.
That's an interesting choice. Why do you pick that one?
Well, there's this shadow government program, which takes people who are hardened criminals and ostensibly to the public kills them. And
Mhm.
then they take them off and they give you a choice. They say, well, we can either really kill you instead of just faking your death, or you can become a hitman for us. And so there's this government institution out there that nobody knows about and that is really controlling a major part of our life.
Yeah.
And so, even though that has nothing to do with robots or technology or even nominally science fiction, here it is out here dealing with the premise that you see in science fiction quite a bit, that society is really not what you think it is, and it's really a lot more oppressive than you think it is, and it limits your choice a lot more than you think it is. But on the other hand, what happens at the end of that movie, La Femme Nikita? She escapes the system. She finds a way to ultimately use the power of that system against itself. And you see this in Star Trek. Star Trek's a great example of this. It's not a movie, but how many episodes has Kirk defeated an evil machine by using its own arguments against it? You've got
Yeah. Oh, it was
V'Ger,
ahead of
you've
its
got
time for sure.
Nomad, you've got, there's the very famous scene where Spock talks about what logic is. Logic is a wreath of pretty flowers that smells bad.
I like it when they talk down Landru, you know,
Yeah.
and it's just like the guns aren't working. They just have their this look at each other and they're like, all right, time to talk down another machine.
But you're right in understanding that all these movies are fundamentally hopeful at the end.
Yeah.
At the end of Colossus, the Forbin Project, the computers decide that they're going to completely isolate the guy who started the program, the
Mm.
scientist who started Forbin. And basically they monitor him 24/7. And the computers say, look, if you don't start doing what we say, we're just going to wipe everybody out. You can have the peace of the rule of computers, or you can have the peace of millions of dead bodies. Your choice. And at the end, he says, I will never, never submit to the computer rule. And, at the end of Rollerball, it's very ambiguous. But at the end, the corporation decides they want to kill Jonathan because his performance as a rollerball athlete has started to eclipse the guilds of business which run society. So
Mhm.
he's an an individual that has superseded the collective. And that's the other thing going on here. That's the debate between, is a society based on individual liberty better, or is one based on collectivism better? That's the whole Cold War rhetoric
Yeah. And that's,
jammed
of
into
course, the good movies never give us a real clean answer on that, do they?
yeah, that's right. That's why Logan's Run ends up with, okay, well, now we've blown up the dome and nobody has to die at 30 anymore. What's left? Oh, you get to hang out with Peter Ustinov and his cats.
Right. And read old books. It's interesting how, though, I mean, you mentioned La Femme Nikita, which just reminds me, we never really left the paranoid age of films. We
No, we
really
haven't. And it's
did.
been so influential.
Yeah. And it just, the difference is that not all of the ones we get now are so rosy in the end. They aren't necessarily uplifting at the end of the day. We get a lot that leave us dashed. And I think as cynical as some of those movies in the 70s may have been, I think if you look at the comparable films of today, it's gotten a lot worse.
And a lot of the interesting thing about a lot of the 70s movies is we end up where we are because of our own contradictions.
Yep.
It's not revealed until after 2001, but the whole reason why Hal went crazy and killed members of the crew was
Yeah.
it had paradoxical information. It
The
had a
coders fucked
paradoxical
it up.
mission. And uh yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, I think you're right. I think later iterations of that, Aliens, the whole Alien movies,
Yeah.
that there's no great ending to those. There's no note of hope. There's no I think there's at the beginning in the first one in Alien, but hey, when was Alien made? 1979.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in a lot
No
of
matter
those
what
movies,
happens in Alien, in any of the Aliens movies, it's, this is not exactly the focus of it, but the truth is, behind the scenes, the corporation continues to survive and chug merrily along.
that's right. And they just get more entrenched in society. And there's not, I mean, it's easy to destroy the individualist impulse in that because corporation domination, the corporate domination of society is so vast. How do you stop it? But that makes sense. You've got now modern day philosophers saying there is no free will. You have no free will. You're poor. Oh, that's because evolutionarily, that's what you're designed. That's who you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important distinction to look at the difference between the two. But it's everywhere. I mean, look at TV, Firefly.
Firefly is very hopeful, though.
No,
Firefly,
it is. That's right. That's right. But that legacy of the paranoid film, whether it's science fiction or another kind of film genre, is absolutely fundamentally ingrained in popular culture now. And the interesting thing is, a lot of it was driven by the arms race in the Cold War. Are we smart enough to get out of this? And what's interesting to me is, at least from a perspective of a nation state perspective, we're a lot safer than we were in the 70s.
arguably, unless you're one of these folks who believe we're already in World War III, it's just a slow burn, but that's another story.
Yes,
Mhm.
that's definitely another podcast.
Well, listen, I think this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We, we've covered a lot of territory, and I look forward to similar conversations in future episodes here. This was a good one.
Well, I watch these movies over and over and over again, and part of that's nostalgia, but part of that is because the themes are really strong here.
Right. Part of it's because they're good movies,
Yeah,
and a
because they're
lot
well
of them,
written and they're
yeah.
well thought out. And I think it's interesting. So the lead in Colossus is a guy named Eric Braeden, and Eric Braeden's really well known for his voice. And what did he do after this? Oh, Eric Braeden's also in one of the Planet of the Apes movies. He plays the scientist in the second one, where the apes have come back to Earth.
Oh, you mean the crazy mutant scientist?
No, no,
No.
that was the third movie.
No, that's the second. The
Oh,
mutant.
that's the second
The
one. Okay.
mutant
The third
planet.
one is where Zira and Gaius, Zira and what's the
When they go
body?
back to modern day Earth.
Yeah, they go back to, and so he's the scientist that's kind of shepherding them through their
Oh, okay.
transition into society. That's the same actor.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's cool.
And then later on, he does a lot of great work on soap operas.
Excellent.
Now, what I think is interesting about the Forbin project is it was a commercial flop.
Hmm.
Did not make any money. In fact, I think it was pulled after the first or second week in an age of Hollywood where movies lasted for 8 months at a run.
Hmm.
But it was critically universally loved by the critics.
Yeah.
Everybody loved the movie. So, but yeah, these are strong movies. They're well written. They have important themes. They reflect. They do the thing that science fiction, when it does it well, makes science fiction at its best, and that is it uses a context to examine, like any other kind of literature, human behavior
Right on. Human nature.
and kind of the consequences of human nature.
Yep. Yep. Amen. All right. Well, with that, I think we're going to head out for now. We'll see you in a couple weeks with another episode. Thanks, as always, for listening.
And be careful about how you let computers have your data.
Our theme music is by Christopher Piatek.